morning. How are you?
Good.
Okay. Go ahead. Give me a brief introduction on who you are, and we'll start in on the questions. This is for my history for Dr. Stromberg.
My name is Robert Sciullo. I'm 89 years old. I'm a child of the Depression, where I hopefully gained a lot of experience in the work ethic. I was in the Army in the end of World War II era, and I worked basically in steel mills and a lot of jobs, but I guess I was more concerned with where I spent most of my career in electric boat division at General Dynamics in the submarine construction. And I can probably start there rather than there, but I do regress occasionally, okay?
Okay. So why don't you tell me about how you started off at General Dynamics?
It started off where?
At General Dynamics at Electric Boat.
I started to work at the draftsman at Electric Boat in September 1952. It was a weekend after President Harry Truman put his initials in the keel of the Nautilus, the first atomic submarine. While I worked there, I drew plans, I checked plans. I primarily worked on 2 Peruvian boats, which were diesel boats. And where I was located was in the South Yard. In the building I was in, we were on the 2nd floor, and the South Yard waves was just outside my window, and that's where they were building the Nautilus. So as I worked there, I was able to look at the Nautilus every day and watch its construction. I also would take my lunch hours and go tour the Nautilus, as it progressed. I also, at that time, was very interested in what was going on, so I would go tour all the workshops at lunchtime, or if I drew a plan and they were going to cast it at the foundry, I'd go to the foundry and watch it being done. It was a lot more informal in them days, and there wasn't as many people working an electric boat at that time. So I was able to go to the pipe shop, the machine shop, the electric shop, the quality control people. I was able to talk to them and know the people. And I progressed pretty well in there. Not only as a draftsman, I start becoming a designer and basically checking plans and things of that nature. And I worked there until September of 52.
Okay.
And the reason that I left really ended up being 2 reasons. One is my dad was pretty sick in Pittsburgh, and my mother was having a hard time with him. And my brother, Henry, my younger brother, was drafted into the Army, so she was alone. Chester had been recalled back up into the Army because of the Korean War. And so I was also able to get a job with H.L. Yo out of Philadelphia that was working in Pittsburgh at the Coppers Company. So I was able to get that job, and not only did I get back to Pittsburgh, but I got back there with a fairly decent pay and a per diem. And at the Coppers Company, I worked as a designer. And lo and behold, what they were designing was a blast furnace unit for a place in Italy. And I ended up being a resident expert. And that was because I labored on blast furnaces, Jones and Laughlin in Pittsburgh, after I had gotten out of the Army. I worked there for about 2.5 years. So I learned everything about blast furnaces, from the the raw ore coming in and scrap metal, all the way to pour and finish castings and basically steel rails and things of that nature. I was able to walk through the whole thing, and I was very fortunate in having a good supervisor that basically allowed me a lot of things, and so I became the resident expert. Like, even the general manager and coppers came down because I guess their bosses told them every question we have to go to this guy here that knows about blast furnaces. So I did very well at at there. And then when my per diem, the job was done, and the per diem basically had dried up, uh, they offered me a job at Coppers, and I told them I would think about it, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I said, give me a week to think about it. And of course, at the same time, I find an ad in the paper from EB in Pittsburgh, looking for people in the drafting field to work at Groton, Connecticut. So I called them up, and lo and behold, who I get is Howie Ward, who I work with. And so he hired me right on the spot and told me, get your ass up there as quick as you can, He said, they need you up there. So basically I left, and I started up there in June of 1958. And my job there was, and I sort of have to look at my notes here.
That's okay. You're fine. Go ahead.
I was classified as a senior designer when I got up there. And again, they were hiring a lot of people. And of course, they had the contract for the Nautilus at that time. And they also had the contract for 2 Peruvian boats, which were diesel boats. We also had the Trigger, Trot, and Harder up there on the dry docks, and they were 3 diesel boats. The Harder was the first one that had pancake engines in it, which was interesting compared to the long diesel engines that they had. So I had a lot of leeway. I basically would look at those boats and stuff of that nature too. Everything. I worked there as a draftsman from then until I was a draftsman. I was a designer. I was a checker. I was a lead man. I basically was like the supervisor. I would pass out the work and do all of that. Plus, I had a lot of background from when I was there before, and they had a lot of new hires, so I had to train a lot of people. Now I got to tell you certain events that happened. I was made a supervisor in June of 1964. And there were certain things that happened at the time, and I'm going to sort of tell you. One was that Electric Boat Division and General Dynamics purchased the Quincy shipyard. Okay. Number 2, the Cold War had heated up. The Russians had something like 500 submarines, and we had somewhere between 150 and 300, so we were very undermanned and worried about it. So the Navy or the government really was worried, and they wanted to build a lot of ships, so they were into a heated thing. The third thing was that the Thresher had sunk, and we were into a subsafe program and what we had to do. And the fourth thing was a Space Apollo program. They were trying to get a man on the moon. And I'll try to put those 3 things into perspective for you, okay?
Okay.
The first is I was sent to Quincy as the supervisor to head up the mechanical engineering group, okay? We had 2 submarines under construction up there. These were construction under Bethlehem Steel up there. That was a 638 boat and a 639 boat. We also had 3 Thresher class submarines that we were building down in Groton. Okay. And what they did is they towed 2 of the submarines, the 14 and 15, up to Quonset Point, not Quonset Point, up to Quincy, to haul lengthen them, basically, to get more buoyancy on the class of submarines. So they sort of called it the 613 class submarines. They kept the 613 in Groton, and they towed the 2 other ones up there, so they came to me. We also had to convert 2 World War II, what they called T2 tankers. They were oil tankers from World War II. We had to cut out the mid-body in those 2 ships and put in control rooms that were identical to those that were basically down at Cape Canaveral and in Houston. So they would place these ships, around the ocean so that they could keep in constant communication with the astronauts who were going to go to fly the moon or make orbits or whatever. So the second thing was the Cold War, where they were pushing us like hell to get out. We were working all kind of overtime, basically, to get out the ships, So they were doing that. And the third thing was that I told you was the sinking of the Thresher. And that really put us in a somber mood and really put us on a fast track, for submarine safety and quality control. The Thresher, like I said, we had 3 ships in the Thresher class, the 613, 14, and 15. That was the Flasher, Grenling, and Gato. The 6th, and I told you about them being sent up to Quonset Point. But the following information I'm going to read to you, because it's to me was very enlightening to us, and I'll get into it. The information are excerpts that I got from the NOVA transcripts from January 9th, 1999. And I just picked out the ones that, and the reason I'm telling you this is it was, to us, an electric boat. It was I don't know how you call it, but it's a loss of innocence is probably the smartest way to say it. But I'll read these to you if you don't mind.
I don't mind. Go ahead.
The Navy newest nuclear submarine, the Thresher, is launched at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. The 274-foot craft is the first of a new class of attack submarine designed to operate deeper and more silently than previously undersea craft. The Thresher was the best of the best. It was, I get emotional over this.
Yeah.
It was this incredible piece of machinery that we put to sea. The first of a whole new class of submarines that was going to be super quiet and give us an enormous advantage over the communist foes. Now, as we see it anyway, I was a little bit, I'm reading their episode.
Yeah.
I was a little bit in the beginning. She really was a leap forward. She was the killer shark, the first real killer. She had the first computer fire control system in a submarine. She had the biggest radar, which had an incredible range. She could fire anti-submarine missiles, and which were the first thing, were a new thing at that time. She was the most advanced submarine we had devised. When the Thresher was introduced, we realized the significance of the moment, and we could only hope that our subs wouldn't be at too great a disadvantage with the Russians. April 9th, 1963, Thresher heads to sea. Early the next morning, she begins deep dive as deep as she can go. It was near the Coaster Canyon that they decided to make the dive, and they had a ship above Skylark, an ASR, which is now called a rescue ship, but certainly not a nuclear submarine rescue ship. It was able to keep a line of communication, so there was dialogue going on. Everything was going smoothly until 9:13 a.m. when a Skylark got a first hint of a problem down below. Thresher reports experienced minor difficulties, have positive up angle, and attempt to blow. We will keep you informed. 3 minutes later, there's a second transmission, garbled and unintelligible. It's followed by a low-frequency rumble and silence. On the surface, there is no sign of trouble, but as the minutes pass, fear takes hold. With 129 men on board, the Thresher ever see sunlight again. Skylark reports Thresher's continuing silence to Fleet Headquarters. It's the first tragedy to strike the nuclear submarine force. It hits a tight-knit community hard. It's beginning to sink in. It's still difficult to believe, even today for me. 129 men down, all machinery gone, all the cutting edge the beginning of a new wave of technology gone. We don't have any idea what went wrong. The very first thing they had to do was to find it. They had to understand as well as they could what went wrong. They had to do forensics. They had to do detective work. They couldn't even find a submarine. And that went on month after month after month. Meanwhile, the Navy Court of Inquiry is making discoveries of its own. Thresher's maintenance record showed that 14% of the joints in the piping that moves high-pressure seawater through the boat had failed ultrasonic inspection. Hundreds of other joints had never been tested, even though the pipe joints of this type and other subs had failed, causing serious flooding. At the depth Thresher was at when she was lost, failure in a 6-inch pipe would dump 100,000 pounds of water per minute into the ship. Thresher's last telephone transmission gave vital clues as to its painstaking reconstruction, what most likely would happen. A failure in the engine room pipe floods the compartment and blows enough fuses to force the reactor to shut down. On battery power alone, Thresher does not have enough power to reach the surface. Normally, when you're at a depth like that, you dive your way out of problems. You just blow, pop, and you apply power and drive yourself up on a safer depth for yourself and get out of trouble. And it couldn't get enough buoyancy. Remember, it's taking on water, it's getting heavier, and then it's going up, sort of stalls, and no longer can stand and start slipping backward. As the Thresher sinks below 1,500 feet, her hull can no longer stand the crushing pressure of the sea. And once you go below the crushed depth, which isn't far away, the Mother Nature takes over. The pressure just crushes that vessel. It goes off like a balloon. Scattered fragments of the twisted metal and all that remained of the Thresher, the greatest submarine of her day. The footage was shot in 1980 by Bob Baylor. You know, he was the oceanographer.
Yeah.
As part of a classified Navy effort to survey the debris. His cover story was his search for the Titanic. Baylor coming upon the thresher for the first time, it was eerie. It was very much like it going to a battlefield or going to Pearl Harbor. Something horrible happened here. A lot of people died, and you sense it. 129 men, casualties of the Cold War, the Navy Court of Inquiry, including that in trying to rush the thresher, exciting new technology to see, the Navy makes mistake in design and construction. The Navy vows it will never happen again. Okay? That was the words. I want to take a minute. At EB, we had a ship at sea running tests. And when we first heard the word of the submarine sank, we thought it was our ship. But then we found it, and us had worked on that ship. I guess we were so subdued that we couldn't even talk. Of course, later we found out that it was a thresher, but still the pain was there. It could have been one of our ships. It seemed to touch us all and make us rededicate ourselves. And we communicated a lot better. And our prime considerations became safety and quality control. In other words, the silos broke down. We had to talk to each other across it. And for me, it's hard to talk about the thresher catastrophe without thinking about the Scorpion. The Scorpion was the SSN 589, which we had built. And I'll just read you that. The Navy vowed that will never again happen, but 5 years later, in the spring of '68, tragedy strikes once again, this time to a submarine headed home from the Mediterranean. And I'll read you a little bit about it, all right? If again,
Okay. Yeah,
from the nuclear attack submarine USS Scorpion SSN 589 had been reported overdue at Norfolk. The submarine was scheduled to return at Norfolk at 1 p.m. today, which was the next day, at the conclusion of a routine extended training. All right. All odd air, surface, and subsurface surface currently underway in the Atlantic Command. Scorpion, her crew of 99 officers and men, has simply vanished in the vastness of the Atlantic. After 10 days, the Navy declares boat and all hands lost, presumed dead. It isn't found until months after Scorpion's memorial service. The remains of the submarine are found. The skipper of the 615 boat was the ship that found the location. That's not in the writing, but I know that.
Okay.
When the Navy assures the public no evidence of hostile action and classifies Scorpion lies in 10,000 feet below the surface of the Atlantic. Bob Ballard uses his mini-sub photographs of the boat remains in 1980. Unlike the Thresher, Scorpion remains largely intact. She must have been partially flooded before she reached crust step. And the Scorpion's tower, this This was Scorpion's tire sail. It was ripped completely off the boat. The extreme water pressure broke off the entire tail end of the sub and rammed that section in the front like it collapsed like a telescope. Names of the image are released in not none of the images are released until 1993 when the Navy finally declassifies information about the Scorpion. Starting in 1960, the U.S. military made a massive undersea water network of microphones used to detect Russian fleet movements and nuclear tests. The microphones were key to locating the Scorpion's remains. I personally, I was not in them, never heard or read what caused the catastrophe. There were many theories, but I never got any evidence of what happened. So that takes care of the thresher part. Why I got emotional. I want to talk about the two T2 tankers for a minute.
Okay.
The T2 tankers had been used in World War II and had been mothballed for 20 years until the refurbishment. The bow, control, the control house, the power plants, etc., as well as the design platform and service for the mission control and hotel spaces were sent. Three ships were sent to Quincy. Of course, the urgency was to have the ships delivered and tested prior to making any moonshots. One of the ships was on dock side testing when I got a call that the main stuffing box shaft was leaking. To make a long story short, after repacking and doing all the tricks of the trade and everything else, it was still leaking. We reviewed all the drawings, all the other data available. I was asked what we should do. You know, I was a senior guy there that had to make that decision. Here I was, a supervisor with less than 2 years' experience, was asked to make the decision either to let the boat go to sea, okay,
Yeah.
or stop it. And a leakage, let me see if I have I had a leakage rate. With a leak, it would go to sea with a leakage rate from the main shaft or dry dock the ship and pull the shaft. I always think about this because I know I had went through a lot at the time. Or to be the I was the guy that was going to make the call. I was either going to be a hero or the ex-employee of the company. I called my boss in Groton and explained the situation to him and provided him with all the technical information that he needed and the pressure I was getting from not only the shipyard up there, but the Navy and NASA as well. I mean, I had to sit in a conference room with all of them and tell them. I went over everything. He never gave, like a good boss, he told me, I got to tell you this, he told me I was closer to the situation than he was, but never make the same mistake twice. Okay? To me. He never asked for my opinion or recommendations. The only decision was to dry dock the ship. I went over everything with my group again, and I gave my decision, which was to dry dock the ship. I went over everything. I gave my decision and explained from a technical and a safety point the only way to know the extent of the damage to the main shaft was to look at it. Well, we pulled the main shaft. The Navy and NASA could have overruled the decision, and they were not happy campers. And I'm sitting in they're all brass and unbelievable. You know, me, you know.
Yeah.
I don't even have any of my people around me.
Yeah.
And they're mad at you. Could see they were all mad as hell because they wanted to go. They were all, they had a lot on the line.
Right.
And they weren't happy. But I told them that I wanted the shaft pulled and inspected. And they pulled the shaft. They let me do it. They pulled the shaft, and there was a crack in the shaft about a half or to a quarter of an inch, 3/4 of an inch deep, that ran about 2.5 feet.
Wow.
So it had to be repaired. And of course, at the time, I didn't know it, but it had to be repaired. And again, they didn't like it, but I didn't think much more of it. I did my job, and I actually went to sea on a ship, that ship, you know, for sea trials. And what they did, just so you just know, what we did at Quonset, we cut the mid body, which was the oiler, out of it, and we put a control room in there that was identical to the control rooms that they had at Houston and at Cape Canaveral, so that they could keep in communications with the astronauts, you know, up in the moon. So that we had these 3 ships, and they had 3 more ships being built somewhere else were identical, so that they could keep in constant communications with that, you know, and the technology wasn't that great that they could, you know, they didn't have any orbiting satellites or something that could do the job for them.
Right.
And of course, these ships were built for World War II, so they were fairly old, like I said.
Right.
So anyway, to get a long story short, I didn't think it was that important that I made that decision on that shaft, but I guess everybody else thought it was. The Navy and EB guys, they said, you know, he must be either very good or very crazy. You know, one or the other. So that sort of puts that story aside. That there. Within a year, I was assigned to Groton and assigned to construction support mechanical for all disciplines of the 613 class, which was a 613, 14, and 15. And all of these were in various stages of construction. I had like construction support. Excuse me, man.
Yeah, that's fine. Take your time.
I sort of jumped now back. The USS 638 Whale, that was the name, it was the Whale,
Yeah.
whose skipper was Bill Wolf, was one of the 2 submarines left at Quincy. You know, they were building 638 and 639. They were having problems. I was asked to put my old team together and resolve any technical problems. In other words, I'd lived up there those few years. I was back in Groton at the time, and we came and resolve any technical problems they had with it, because they were having real problems with the 638. I still had my normal work job at Groton, and it necessitated my time between both facilities. I had to go both places. I was like on a 24/7 day schedule, 12 to 16 hours a day. And I did split my time between the 2 places. I should tell you that I had a very good relationship. I had a good crew too of workers, no question. I should tell you I had a very good relation with Captain Wolf. He was a skipper of the 38. I would drive up to Quincy almost every night. I'd leave EB about 3:45 to beat the crowd, and I'd drive up to Quincy. I'd have a meeting with my crew up there and go over, review the day's work and set up what we do the next work. And then I would tour the ship between 8 and 9. One of them was to look at what they had done and to see if I seen anything else work. And every night that I would do this, I would sort of be working one end of the boat to the other, and Captain Wolf would be, Bill Wolf, would be walking the other way. And first couple nights, we just exchanged pleasantries. And about the third time, he asked me what the hell I was doing there. And I told him, I says, he knew I had the group of people there. And he asked me what I was doing. I told him, well, I basically assign work to the team. And what I do is I go over with them every night. And pretty much after they leave, for the night's work, we have a couple people working night shift, but I said, we do it. They basically go home, and I basically look over again what they have, and I come down and check. I showed them I had a checklist of the things that I had assigned to them and what they had done and what the status was. And then I would also look at things and pick up things that I seen that I didn't think were right. So I had my own list of what I thought was wrong. Okay? And he said, can I have your list? I said, sure. So him and I basically went over the list, and then he said, well, I'm going through the ship doing the same damn thing, making lists again. So we exchanged lists every night that I'd go through or he'd go through, and we'd always talk, and I always gave him the list, and and either to him or the XO, and I would tell him what things were done and what wasn't done, and we'd talk and exchange things, and it developed into not only a professional relationship, but a friendly relationship. And I'm sure he helped my career. I'm sure he helped my career by telling the bigwigs, you finally got some dumb ass that knows what the hell he's doing,
Right.
We took the ship on sea trials, and we were having a problem with coming out of the depth, so we had to make some changes. But we took the ship when we put it on sea trials, and we took it down to Groton. And what I did was I had the naval architects take a good look at it, and what we did is we extended the length of the Fairwater planes.
Oh, okay.
About 3 inches, and that gave it more of a lift than that. So then we had to go to sea trials, and I had to take it back out to sea trials. And of course, he'd tell me what the hell to do. He'd joke with me a lot. I tell him, take it as deep as you want, and take all the angles and dangles you want to do with it. He said, how sure are you? I said, well, I'll either be a hero or I won't have to worry about it. So basically we went, and it went through the whole thing. And I actually delivered that ship at sea. I signed it off for electric boat. And one of the things, and that was a big, and I think that was a big boost in my career on a 38 boat. And again on my career was on the T2 tankers on that shaft. In other words, I either thought I was crazy or I was smart.
Right.
Okay. So that's sort of with that story. So
Hey, Dad, what was your education? Like, did you have any college at that point, or was this strictly high
I graduated from high school in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I went to Carnegie Institute of Technology at night
Yeah.
because I worked during the day. Uh, Pretty well, our family wasn't wealthy in them days. My dad basically labored at the Iron City Brewery.
Yeah.
I worked at Kroger's grocery store. That was a grocery store chain in Pittsburgh, but no longer there. That still exists, but it was there. And of course, everybody was in the service when I graduated. I graduated in '45, summer of '45, and the war ended right after that. And I really had planned on going into the service the day after I graduated. And of course, my mother cried like hell. And there was Chester, who was my brother, a real hero of the war. He was in from 1940. He was December 6th. He was in the Marines, in the 1st Marine Division, right through to China, and then he was in the Korean War. And basically, my mother didn't want me to go, right in the service. He was still over there, and she was worried to death, so I didn't go into the early 46. It's still considered World War II era veteran.
Right.
But anyway, I went to Carnegie Tech at night. I took various courses there, mostly in chemical engineering. I don't know why at that time I was always interested in chemistry. I probably have the equivalency of about 2.5 years of college. I never graduated from college.
Yeah.
But I did take courses all the time I was at EB. I would take courses. I took correspondence courses, and I basically used to go to Thames Valley, which is now Three Rivers.
Right.
And they were up in Norwich at the time, and I basically took courses there all the time. And then I did a lot of online courses at the time. So I pretty well had a pretty rounded background. I'll get a little bit into that a little later, okay?
Okay.
But just to finish off the first question you asked me, I'll sort of give you a rundown of things that from 1952 to 1956, I was a draftsman, a designer, and a checker at EB. 58 to 62, same things. I went through that whole period. In other words, I had to split service. I told you I worked for Copper's company.
Right.
From 62 to 69, I was a supervisor of design. From 69 to 73, I was chief of design, materials, and administration. From 69? From 69 to 73, I was chief of the design. I got the chief. To 73. From 73 to 83, I was manager of engineering services and products. In 1983 to 91, I was a director of planning and materials services. And from 91 to 96, when I finally retired, I was chief engineer, design and engineering services. Now, I probably was the only guy that ever got to that position without a college degree at EP. During my time from supervisor on, I also had special assignments while still maintaining positions at EB. I established an engineering office at Quonset Point. I managed a Tampa engineering office. I coordinated the transfer of the Tampa office to Charleston, South Carolina, and I provided design service to Savannah, Georgia shipyard building minesweeper ships. I was the only guy that ever got an outside contract to do that during that same time. But basically, I was more what they call the jack of all trades. Basically, I did a lot of stuff on my own. I would basically, I'll sort of get into that a little bit with you. But I know I impressed a lot of people at Electric Boat. I really was not a social guy.
Right. Right.
I was probably a bastard guy.
I always remembered the stories that you tell that you would never swear in front of women, though.
Well,
In your
I
movies.
was always fair though,
Yeah.
and I was always straight. Let me see where I was at. At what point did I become manager? Tell me how they allowed the advancements. I became a manager in 1973, yeah. I think they needed me and the position was open, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever considered others. I don't know. It seemed to be a natural progression. It seemed that they needed me more than I needed them.
Right.
I had several things in my favor. I'll give you a little advice of how I operated. I always thought through my hands. Now, I do a lot of work myself on different
Right.
things. I always thought through my hands. If somebody made it, then I could either fix it or make it better. If I could not do it with my hands, then I'd make a tool that could do it or could do it better. That was my philosophy. I always believed that. It's sort of like my definition of technology, which is the application of science. In other words, I was always in high school and college, I was very good in the sciences and in the maths. I wasn't very good at English or social studies or social habits. I was basically in the mathematical field.
Yeah.
And I believed in the definition of technology as the application of science, which is the body of knowledge available on how to make something or how to make something better. That's what I believed in. I always thought that science was the study and the knowledge of the physical world, all right?
Mm-hmm.
By using systematic observations and experimentation to determine what things are and how they behave, all right?
Yeah.
In other words, if I thought that way when I had a problem to fix, and everybody used to wonder how I was able to zero in on fixing a problem. Well, to me it was simple. What made it work and why did it work? And I know even Jeffrey asked me, how do you know that? Well, I think it through first, or try to think it through first.
Right.
And how things behave. In other words, most things will have a behavior pattern to it.
Yeah.
I always use the scientific method, which has been known for years. You formulate yourself a question, you collect the data by observation or experimentation, you test the results for accuracy, you independent testing for conformity, and you express the results in mathematics. In other words, if you can't write a formula for it after you did all this stuff, it ain't going to work.
Yeah.
I would always use or draw up a flow chart or diagram. Early on, while I was a designer, supervisor, etc., I had to know what my product was and who was going to get it. I ultimately flow chart the path, and this is pretty important, this part, for anybody.
Okay.
I ultimately flow chart from contract award to design contract to detailed design to drawings. Who received the drawings and what did they use it for? What was the product that they produced? And who did they give it to? And I would go through each step and each product until I could consume the manufacturing or purchase, okay, until I knew what happened to it in the end. Of each item, until it got installed in the ship, the testing, the closeout procedures, etc., required tools that you may need along the line, and required at each step, although my flow chart was manual, I used it consistently to the management, to the Navy, and anybody else that would basically help. I had this thing against the wall. Dave Pearson was my supervisor, and he had me put it against the wall up there. And then when somebody would ask any kind of a question, he would either, what he knew, would go to it, or he'd call me in and make me go through the thing. And I used to have them sit there to the Navy and everybody else and go through it. And they ultimately put it into a thing. And the results were always very, even Valiotis's guys were dumbfounded, you know. Because, you know, people didn't know that. I don't know why, but I felt I had to know it from beginning to end.
Right.
And it wasn't that I was trying to promote myself. I think it was more an inner interest that I was interested in what was really happening.
Right.
Okay. So I sort of wanted you to know that sort of background. Question 3, you gave me. You said, how involved were you with the birth of nuclear power at EB in the first nuclear power submarine? Well, I told you that
Right.
I worked almost exclusively in non-nuclear.
Right.
Admiral Rick Rickover, Admiral Rickover, you probably heard that name.
Yeah, I know.
He wanted a separation between nuclear and non-nuclear. The nuclear was mostly the reactor room, reactor compartment, and part of the engine room. Do you want to stop now?
No, I'm just letting the dog go out. Go ahead.
I did end up in charge of nuclear design, you know, before I left EB.
Right.
In 1993, I got in nuclear. I did take courses in nuclear physics, knowledge about nuclear vessels, and the primary and secondary systems, the insulation for the deckings and stuff of that nature. And I did design work on the Nautilus, you know, in both nuclear and non-nuclear areas. But basically, I was not a nuclear engineer.
Right.
But I certainly ended up that way, you know, but it's mostly as to getting. Another question you asked me, how do people change over your time working here? Did you notice equality in what regard, you know? Well, I have to be honest with you. It was a world different for me when I went up there to work. And someday I'll get into that with you, but I myself think the Thresher incident made most people more serious and willing to work to share information together. I personally never had a problem at EB with either people of color or females or anything else. In other words, I would always treat them just like any other person that I ever worked with. And of course, I grew up in an integrated neighborhood, so when I was a child, so I never had a problem with it, you know,
Right.
race or anything like that.
Do you remember Jim Mosley?
Yes.
From purchasing?
Yeah.
Do you know he wrote a book about being a colored man in electric boat being treated unfairly?
Well, I believe that he would think that,
Yeah.
but I never had that problem. I basically I heard you maybe heard of Ralph Levy and
Yep.
people of Levy and Hawkins, Vern Hawkins.
Yep.
They were both black people. Ralph and
Right.
I lived in the same house. We over with the Saffamillas when I was up there the first time. We were drinking buddies, you know.
Yeah.
I never had a problem with them. We used to play cards. Steve Mingo. That hers ain't working.
Come on, Shiro.
It's fine. Just she's
Yeah, you
still
may
there.
have
Keep
heard
talking.
Steve Mingo. He was basically colored from the islands down in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
They were all friends. We played cards together. I never had a problem with them.
Yeah.
And I never had a problem with EB. I could
Right.
communicate with him, and in that there was never a problem with me by the quality, and I never had that problem.
Yeah.
I did notice a change uh, from Pittsburgh to there.
Oh, okay.
Basically, in Pittsburgh, Italians weren't much better than black people
Yeah.
in Pittsburgh. In other words, when I worked at I worked at Jones and Laughlin's steel mill. I told you about the blast furnaces. I
Right.
don't know whether I, but anyway, all my Irish drinking buddies all worked for the railroad.
Yeah.
There was a Monongahela connecting railroad, which was a very good job. I tried to apply for that job. They didn't hire Italians, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, uh, but anyway, I didn't have a problem with black folks. Sorry, you know, and you probably know that even from.
Yeah.
They came to our house and played cards and, you know,
Yeah.
everything else. And you asked me now, what was my greatest accomplishments?
Yeah. I think I asked that twice. Just only answered
Yeah,
it once.
you did. I think in my own terms, all right.
Yeah.
What I find is most people, including your sister Kathy, who worked at EB, would say no one ever taught them anything. They didn't teach you a job well.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did, and that was especially true in the design department, I developed and issued a drafting manual. It was about 4 inches thick. But what I found is I'd gone through there that people would draw things up the same thing differently. So I put the drafting manual together with the best practices of doing everything. How to make a stuffing box. How to do put packing. I seen guys come in and put packing in backwards because they didn't know how to put packing in a stuffing box. So the drafting manual covered everything through that. And of course, that drove people crazy, you know, because now I was standardizing a method of drafting.
Yeah.
So I did that. I developed and then implemented the electronic parts and engineering bill of material, almost single-handedly. And that was probably the toughest job. No, I'm doing this while I'm doing these other jobs. Doing that was probably one of the hardest jobs that I had to do, because that meant conformity. In other words, you had to basically do parts. Everybody had to use the same part, you know.
Yeah.
They didn't have a part. They weren't like the automotive industry where they had like the parts and that, you know. I would have one guy draw a bolt one way and another way. So I had that engineering and standardization is what I was forcing. And again, I believed it, and I did it. And of course, all these things are impressive to guys, you know. Even Valiotis was impressed by me, you know.
Yeah.
I also presented an electronic base for drawings and engineering notices. All right?
Yeah.
I sold the idea, but they turned it over to the administrative group. Now, this is getting when there was changes in the organization, and they're saying that guy over there ain't going to get this one, you know, so they gave it away, you know. I have to be honest, Tovar was a general manager then, and he used to put his arm around my shoulder, like, he'd tell me, I know you want it, but I'm giving it to him. I said, I don't have a problem with that. So anyway, they turned that over, and then we ended up doing it. Now, I had a whole lecture on basically going electronic for drawings and that. And of course, to me, I always thought standardization saved a lot of time. You know, if you were able to pick something off instead of doing it. So anyway, they did that. They gave that to the administration group. I presented the CAD/CAM electronic system. You know, that basically was just drawings and stuff. That system, the first system, which was a 2H2S file. I presented the CAD/CAM electronic system, and again it was accepted and turned over to the electronic and computer division.
Yeah.
I basically was in California at that time. I just going to tell you an off the beat story, all right?
Okay.
I went to this place and I was trying to do something with the microfilm. You know, that we used to have microfilm,
Yeah, I remember.
which is a pain in the butt. And I also had a hard time with manuals. I'd go on a ship and them sailors would rip out the pages, you know, like that they needed, and you couldn't find them. So I was thinking, why can't I basically get this into some sort of thing that I can get it? Your microfilm was a pain in the butt and was never up to date. No one ever could keep it up to date. So I went there and I start talking to these guys, and I says, you know, my problem, you know, they were an electronics group down there. It was at college, you know.
Yeah.
And I have a whole presentation on it, but I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, I'm talking, and they're trying to sell this product, and I said, hey, I'm not looking for that. I said, I don't want to buy something. I want to know, how do you do it?
Right.
And they looked at me and they said, oh, well, you better talk to Dr. So-and-so. So they bring this guy in. He has on like a dress, you know, like a smock. It comes down, and his legs are bare, and he has on sandals. He has long hair, blonde hair.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this guy, and he has a doctor's degree.
Yeah.
And he starts talking to me. And basically, I learned more from him in 2 hours than I ever learned from anybody else about basically electronic CAD/CAM systems and basically how to develop things and how to put it in a computer system and assist for both not only for input but retrieval information and do it. Right.
Yeah.
So I basically tried to sell that at EB. I basically went there and sold it. And of course, that was another one they turned over to the computer people. You know, I had to go make the presentation to them, and they basically wanted to develop their own rather than buy it. They should have bought it, believe me.
Yeah.
I think that was the University of California, if I look back in my records that I got it. Okay. these are accomplishments or things that I said. The flow chart that I did, that I told you from beginning to end of the product, was revolutionary to them at Electric Boat. Now, we always had diagrams of certain systems. In other words, the seawater system had a diagram, the high pressure air system had a diagram, everybody had a diagram. But this basically diagrammed the whole workings of everything, and the Navy and everybody wanted it. They finally did computerize it, but I don't know who took credit for it. You know, they took it. The other thing I did there that they didn't have, what I find is most people would not read in detail how to do anything or do anything. If you ask your sister, she said, no one ever trained me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I introduced in the engineering department what I called the cheat cards. I would just have the information you needed. If you had to find this, you went here. They were little cards. I had some. I didn't bring them with me, but I had them. And they were only about 4 inches wide by about 6 inches deep and on both sides. If you wanted to know about the 2P system, you looked at that. You could find what you wanted to do, how to do it, how to go on a computer and do it.
Right.
And those were a big hit. That was the best training tool I ever had to do there. Okay. That's sort of, you said things I did. I like that. How many submarines were you part of building? All right. I have numerous submarines I had something to do because I basically had construction support, which, went to each one of the submarines.
What was the last one you worked on?
The Seawolf.
Okay.
The Seawolf class. Yeah, I basically was in charge of the nuclear now Seawolf department.
Yeah.
But I mostly worked on the boats. I had extensive experience on a 685 class. I had the 6, 13, 14, and 15 ships as I knew backwards and forwards. In fact, all 3 skippers of those ships became admirals.
Wow.
The 640 class, the fleet boats, I had all kind of work on those.
Yeah.
And again, I worked on mostly the Seawolf class because we were first developing it.
Right.
So I basically, between hands-on work and design work, I touched just about every boat that they had there. I have
and that was a big boom time between that was probably their biggest boom too.
Right.
Like with the 688s and the Tridents, like they were pumping out 1 or 2 submarines a year over there.
Yeah. No, like I say, if your mother ever talks to you, my day started at 4 o'clock in the morning and didn't get done till 8 or 9 at night.
Yeah, I don't remember you home much as a child. No. I don't. I remember you more once we moved to Waterford, and then you were like 6 to 6. But before that, like I only
during the days of working with the 613 class and the 640 class, and then they would send me places. I mean, I can show you an inch thick papers of different courses I basically went to or seminars, and actually did seminars.
Yeah.
So that sort of answers the question about that.
Right. You answered the Thresher.
Yeah. And you asked me if there was any credibility at TWA. As far as I'm concerned, no.
Okay.
I never seen any facts or anything I ever read, although I met the guy that was flying on Pilgrim Airlines and say, see the flash in the sky, I actually met him and talked with him one time, but I never found any truth to anything to
Yeah, well,
anything.
they thought that was the Trepang that did it.
Well, a lot of people did. Basically, they thought there was a test of a submarine that fired a missile at it, but I never found anything in it. If you could go back, would you change anything?
Yeah. Last one. Would you change anything?
I would have included barcoding in the part system. But what I was worried about, if I tried to do too much of that, I wouldn't be able to sell the part system and the engineering bill. What I had is my biggest opponents at EB when you try to present something was really the other departments would see that this infringed on what they had to do, and believe me, they didn't like it.
Right.
They didn't like over in purchasing. They didn't like the automatic purchasing.
No, they did not.
They didn't like automatic testing. They didn't like things like that. So they basically, I thought if I try too much, I'm not going to get it. Now, to me, it seemed natural at that time. I did take, I could program in COBOL, and I could program different things in that time. And I did. I went to school, up at it was Thames Valley at the time, that ended up being Three Rivers.
Right.
Okay. But I always was sorry I didn't do the barcoding when I did the part system.
Yeah.
Because it would have saved a lot of time. If people could have barcoded instead of, we used to etch all the part numbers and stuff on, the different things, the part number. So they'd have to look at the part number, where if they could just use a scanning machine, they could have just barcode and they could have found stuff. I can tell you war stories that you would never believe. And I could tell you just a real quick one.
Okay.
I had to send divers down in to look for parts in the ballast tanks because they would find a part laying up at Quonset Point that had the ship number on it, and the part number. They didn't know what the hell got put on the ship, or it got missing,
Yeah.
So as the Navy and everybody else, I had to send a diver. I said, they said, here's the part. You don't have it on the ship. And I said, the part's on the ship. I have a close. I went to close out. That's a whole different story. How to close out everything was part of that flow chart that I had done. And I had to prove to them that was closed out. But they made me send a diver. Navy diver went down there and found it. But what happened a lot of times with pieces, especially plating, it was easier for a guy to make a new piece, cut out a new plate, than it was for him to go try to find it in a polished stack that they had no consideration on what the hell happened. In fact, I had to send a guy full-time into the South Yard plate yard to basically catalog all the parts, all the plates and parts down there, so we knew what the hell to do. Because they didn't know it down in the yard.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would have included the barcoding because that's a lot easier for them to find stuff.
Right.
And I should have done it with a part system, and I didn't do it. And I sort of regret it now. But I tell you, I thought it was too much. Even the parts engineers and everybody was fighting me over it. Nobody likes standardization.
Right.
An engineer is the worst one for standardization. They want to think they invented everything themselves. And that I drive them crazy. They would come in with a new idea to me and say, hey, how about this? And I would basically tell them, we already have that over here,
Right.
So they didn't like, the creative people don't like standardization.
Right.
The last question I think you asked.
Yeah, I did.
What was that?
So out of all your time there, Dad, like it was incredible. It was so it was such a long career. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I was 68 when I retired, and I probably would not have retired had they not given the golden handshake.
right.
So I really considered it a long time. Now I was away from home a lot of times from your mother. Your mother basically had done. She raised you kids
Right.
more than me. I had very little to do with it. Uh, but I was 68 at the time, and they gave the golden handshake, and I just couldn't logically not accept it. No. Probably at that time they were also changing too.
Right.
One of the greatest changes that I noticed at the end of my career was that they were using teams of people to do things instead of individuals. In other words, they were using the group concept rather than letting it. They were the autocratic guy wasn't going to be there anymore. I was like an autocratic guy. I had to be honest with you. Although I did always consult and always taught my groups what I knew.
Right.
But I just couldn't, in my own mind, not retire. With the golden handshake, they gave you 2 more years. On it. So
Yeah.
that's why I
And plus,
retired.
I mean, the Cold
And then
War
I
was
worked. I did work about a year and a half later as a consultant for them.
right. Right.
So I
But
retired.
I mean, they had slowed down a lot too at that point. I mean, the Cold War was over, and they didn't have the contracts. Like, I mean, even can you
Well,
hear me? I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
It was a different class of people were coming in.
Yeah.
The management was getting different. Although they were probably nicer people, they were less understanding people.
Right.
Uh, I don't know how quite to explain it, but I had a flow, like I told you, I had made a flow chart of how that whole place worked.
Yeah.
I found that these people from St. Louis were coming in, and they'd ask me to go over, Tovar or whoever was the general manager at the time would ask me to go over the chart with them or something like that.
Yeah.
And what I found is a lot of management would resent those big wheels going to me to do that. You know what I mean? So you sort of, I didn't socialize. I wasn't part of the social crowd,
Right.
So I felt it was right. Somebody once told me, "You'll know when it's time to retire." And I guess I sort of looked at it and said, "I don't want to go through any more of this with these guys," So I retired at 68.
Right.
And then they gave me 2 more years. I worked probably over 42 years at Electric Boat.
Yeah. Wow. It was a good career, Dad. It sure took good care of us.
Well, I learned a lot, and I could go into different stories, but I think I gave you enough.
You
Okay.
did. I did. I really appreciate it, Dad. Thank you so much.
Do you have any special questions?
No, I don't. Jeff, you got anything you want to ask your grandfather?
Well, recently what you just said, because I'm not familiar with the term, what does it mean by the golden handshake?
Well, what happened was that they were basically trying to cut costs. Corporations are always hungry for money, not to give money away. So the golden handshake was to take people in higher managers that were making good money and tell them, hey, we'll give you 2 years of pay, which was 2 years, if you would leave, so that they could hire or put a lower paying guy in a job.
Mm-hmm.
So that was why they gave the golden handshake.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they turned around and hired me back the next year.
To pay you a lot of money. To be a
2 years
consultant.
they kept me on as a consultant.
Yeah. All right, Dad, I really appreciate your time and you going through this. I find it very fascinating still. So.
Well, I have a lot of war stories, but I try to stick with the basics.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm sure after Dr. Stromberg sees this, if he wants war stories, he'll let me know.
Okay.
All right, Dad, thanks. Jeff, I'll call you in a bit.
All right.
Okay, bye, guys. Love
Right.
you.
Love you too.